or on the phone. Worst millennial ever on the Zoom. Okay, so I'm looking at the schedule actually. Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. I'm going to keep this short because we have a very structured layout. I hope everyone was able to get their agenda for this class, not class, for, oh man, for this, um, for our meeting today. I appreciate everyone being willing to transition pretty much fully online. For those of you who maybe today was a struggle getting online or a computer, we can set people up here, in one of our conference rooms with a computer in the future, if you need to go that route. As you all know, as if I couldn't, as if we needed any more interesting press. One of the members of our group actually tested positive for COVID and was responsible enough to give me a heads up. So I give you guys a heads up. We technically didn't fall into that category for contact tracing, where you're within 6 feet of someone for 10 minutes or more. So this person didn't have to contact us, but they chose to. And because of that, we are, out of abundance of caution, we're seeing numbers spike. We're trying to transition more online. And we brought in some facilitators who are going to help us, I think, make the most of that experience. So with that, thank you for being willing to translate this or transfer this more to a Zoom format for now, and also being able to be that adaptable. So with that, just welcome. Good morning, everyone. And we're going to have Councilmember Johnson, who is going to introduce PPMC for us, and then we'll get started on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. Glad to be in attendance today. Just briefly wanted to recognize the Public Policy and Management Center over Wichita State. Misty and LaShonda have been doing great work in this community for quite some time, and specifically personal experience with the Fairmount project and Project Wichita, and they are very detailed and organized, and we felt like they could kind of help us get to a purpose where we are collectively and set some goals, some tangible goals for this council. So with that, I'll kick it over to them and we can get started.
Not being able to be heard. Great, thank you so much. I'm Misty Bruckner. We have several folks that are going to be helping us out today from the Public Policy and Management Center. LaShonda Garnes, Deanna Carithers, Aaron Evak, and Drake are all part of our team here. And we really appreciate the opportunity from the mayor and Councilmember Johnson and city manager to be a part of this. We'll be in charge of process, making sure we get everybody a chance to have their voices be heard. And I'll give a little more details as we start going into some breakout groups. I'd ask everybody now if you could mute your phone or your computer, just it'll help with some of that background noise. And the first thing on our agenda really is getting an overview of what the Wichita Police Department has done with their community response, and the city manager is going to walk us through that, and then we'll get into some discussion questions with all of you. So again, thanks for having us. We are super excited to be a part of this and appreciate all of you for volunteering and to taking this effort to the next level. So Bob?
Misty, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I've been having some problems on Zoom calls with my microphone. So if there's a problem at some point, just raise your hand, let me know. I'm going to be brief. You all have copies, probably received now multiple copies of the report. But first of all, I want to provide some context. As you know, we've had a number of community groups that have expressed concerns about policing and police reforms in Wichita, been mostly vocal. Well, actually, some groups have been active for a number of years, but I would say we've had some new voices at the table over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. And at the suggestion of the mayor and Councilmember Johnson, we pulled together all of the items that had been shared by the various groups and kind of eliminated the duplicate items and came up with 16 discrete recommendations from the community about what we should do to bolster our policing efforts. And I'm going to go through those real quickly. you're going to have an opportunity at the next part of this process today to talk about these. What I like to do is cover our response, allow you to ask me any questions, and then we'll solicit your feedback in a session here facilitated by by WSU, Misty and LaShonda and her group, their group, excuse me. The first thing, and the one that's probably been discussed the most in the community, is a recommendation to defund the police department. And without going real deeply into this, that definition, or the definition to defunding the police department, is pretty broad depending on who you're talking to, whether it's in our community or it's around the country. What we've done is we've embraced the basic concept that talks about providing support services for the police department to allow them to deal with many of the social service issues that impact them. And then also to make sure we have sufficient resources for a true community policing operation. That's been an emphasis of the chief. I'm going to talk about community policing in a minute, but we have had a few initiatives where we have brought in social workers. We work with the homeless. We work pretty closely with our housing department to look at some of the root causes of poverty in our community and to address some of the issues that contribute to crime. But we can do more in that regard. And so it's a matter of, we want to put together a comprehensive model. And I think your voices will be important, as well as some of the other groups that we've been working with, to help us really come up with the Wichita model for comprehensive policing, including the necessary wraparound social services. So once we come up with that model, it'll be up to the mayor and council and others to determine what the best way is to fund that model. And so we're going to kind of sidestep the issue of whether you take resources out of police and put it into other social services, or whether we just need to find the right funding streams for social services in the community and make sure that we have the right dollars in place for a true community policing initiative, one that is based in the neighborhoods, and it's all about relationship building. I'm going to go on from there to the next recommendation, which was to create a safe environment for police officers to report misconduct by fellow officers. And we do have a pretty robust system for that, for officers and for members of the public to submit complaints about officers and their conduct. We also have a policy I'm going to talk about in a minute called duty to intervene, which really puts the burden on police officers to report improper conduct inside the department, even if it's with fellow officers. The next is adopt a policy of community policing. A lot of people don't realize it, but we were one of the first communities in the country to come up with community policing, or to introduce the concept, back in 1994. And the city received some awards back then. Chief Ramsey has said that he'd like to change the model. The model really focused on community police officers, people who are designated as such. What he wants is to have community policing integrated through the entire department. So everyone that is in the field, every officer, sergeant, lieutenant, that they are all committed to community policing and the principles of community policing. So that will be a lot more robust effort as we move forward. The next one had to do with revoking qualified immunity for police officers. And this is one where we did not agree with the response, or with the recommendation that was coming forward. Qualified immunity does not prevent someone from suing the city or an officer for misconduct. But what it does do is it draws a line between what someone does in the line of duty and what they do outside of their work. And so if they're outside the scope of their work, they can be found liable, and qualified immunity will not apply to them. And that's a principle that goes beyond the police department, but applies to the work of all of our employees. And it's been common law for a number of years throughout the country. And it's a way, frankly, to also protect the taxpayer from frivolous lawsuits. But I know there's a fine line there, and I know your group will probably want to talk more about that going forward. The next recommendation was to increase transparency related to officer discipline and the use of force. And back in 2017, we restructured the what was called then the City Managers Review Board, and is now called the Citizens Review Board. And I think that group has worked extremely well since 2017. It's a very active group. They review all complaints that are filed. So far they've looked at 214 external complaints and 145 internal complaints. And they take those seriously. They have the ability to drill down and get information, including information regarding personnel action, but they do so in a way that protects the employee, but also has full disclosure to this group of citizens. Next item is test all outstanding rape kits. This was an issue up until I think about a year ago. I think it was actually 2 years ago that we had almost 1,700 untested kits. And the chief has committed the resources necessary to get us to the point where all outstanding kits have been tested now, and we stay current with any rape kits that are filed. So this is no longer an issue, and we have the sufficient resources to be able to continue to address that. The next one is banning choke holds and knee holds and strangle holds. We agree with that. Our policy had already guidance on holds, but we've strengthened that policy under the chief new language that prohibits all holds that impede normal breathing or blood circulation. The next is implement a de-escalation policy. We started that in 2016, again under Chief Ramsey, and all of our officers are trained in de-escalation and all the necessary say that it's behavior that is inhumane or against policy. So we ask them to use their judgment in that regard and to err on the side of protecting the citizen. And we have a policy now, and you've received the language that requires all officers to do that, and they can be disciplined, including being terminated if they don't intervene in an improper incident. Next one was banning shooting at vehicles, and we agree with this. And the only time that we would ever now shoot at a vehicle is if the vehicle is actually being used as a weapon and threatening someone. In other words, the vehicle would run someone down if the officer didn't intervene. The next was adopt the use of force continuum with at least 6 points and clear rules of engagement. You'll see in the report, we have been practicing that for a period of time. It's embedded in our regulations and all of our training. And there's a chart that shows how we apply the use of force continuum. The next is develop a comprehensive reporting process for use of force, and we do have that in place. We've had a policy for a number of years that requires an officer to report anytime there's a use of force, and even some actions that fall short of that, but are still considered to be moving towards the escalation of use of force. And then there are two others. One is to provide the Citizens Review Board with subpoena power. I've been involved in community discussions about this issue for probably 7 or 8 years. Right now, I believe that if you asked the Citizen Review Board, they would tell you that subpoena power is not necessary. What it does do is it brings a whole different burden to the review board, in that they would need legal counsel and they would need investigators. and in order to do their work. And they don't believe that we've had cases, at least since they've been formed, that we would require them to do that. They believe they have access to all the information that's necessary. The chief has been very transparent with the board, and I think to this point, they're satisfied that they are receiving everything they need in order to make findings and provide recommendations. And then the last item is to ban no-knock warrants. And we don't have a universal ban, but the only exception to this ban on no-knock warrants is if we have a hostage situation or if there's a violent crime being conducted. And at that point, it's necessary to protect the victim. But other than that, we will not use no-knock warrants. So that's all I have regarding the report. Are there any questions regarding the content of the report before you get into discussions?
And we're going to give you an opportunity to ask those questions within the facilitated process as well. So if you think of something, we can grab it there too.
Okay, well, turn over to you, Misty. Thank you, everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. So what we're going to do now is to take you into breakout rooms. So if you've been a part of a Zoom meeting before, we're actually going to break everybody that's on this larger call into smaller groups. So think of it just as if we were all together and we might be doing discussions at small roundtable conversations. That's really the process we're using now. It's just going to be virtual. When you get into these groups, there will be a facilitator from Wichita State, and our job as facilitator is just to run process. So we'll be asking the questions. We are neutral. We want to make sure everybody in the group has a chance to share their thoughts and their ideas for this. We will be taking notes and we will be keeping time because, again, we want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. And so sometimes any of us can get on a roll and keep talking. And so we'll be using the timer saying, hey, you got a minute. I'll let you know when your minute's up and we'll be moving on to that next person. If you are not done with your thoughts or ideas, you're still going to have opportunity to share. You can put those in the chat room or you can send that as an email afterwards. Again, we just really want to make sure everybody has a chance to respond to these questions. We will be recording, so we are recording now, and we will be recording in the breakout room. So you want to make sure everybody is aware of that. The other thing is we are not trying to build consensus today. So if you completely disagree with what somebody says, that's okay. We are not trying to get everybody to agreement today. That's our work as we continue as the council moves forward in this effort. As I spin you into this, just making sure I haven't forgotten anything, continue to stay on mute and click on when it's your chance to speak. And the other thing is I just want to tell you what those two questions are before we go into the small groups, and we'll put those in the chat as well. So the first question really is what Bob was leading into. Is there any questions that just there's confusion or we need to clarify or something in the report just didn't make sense? So we want to make sure that we can provide that feedback and get those questions answered. And then the second question will be, what one or two things did you find most critical? Either you strongly agreed with and want to make sure that work moves forward, or you disagree with and want to make sure that your voice is heard, that you think that there's something else that could or should be done with that. So that is kind of the process and questions. We'll repeat this when we get into the groups. We're going to spin into the groups now. So this is a little bit like Wizard of Oz, where you're going to be here and then you're going to go into a different session right away. Facilitators, remember to hit record as soon as you start those sessions.
Misty,
right.
before we spin out, LaWanda had her hand raised. So
Okay.
Let's grab her question and then we'll go into our breakout.
Thanks, LaShonda.
Okay, just quick question. So are we going to have another chance after this to address Bob Layton, or are you just going to take notes and then it'll all go back to him?
Our plan is to take notes and for it all to go back to him. If there's something that's fairly easy we can get to, we'll be glad to look at that as well. Yeah, but he's going to respond to all the, well, he will have someone help him respond to all the questions that will go back to everybody as a part of those notes from the police department. Okay, thank you.
I think we have one other person joining us for our breakout.
So I know Reverend Graham was trying to speak before
Okay.
breakout, so I don't know if.
We'll make sure to get his question if it's not answered in his small group. But to get us started, the question that we are discussing first is, was there one question of clarification you have regarding the document that has been shared by WPD that you would like to gain clarity on or have further discussion about?
Good morning. This is Tarek. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I went through it thoroughly, the document that was sent. I don't have any questions or clarifications. Only thing I was hoping and expecting was the qualified immunity part. Was that ever brought up, or was there any discussions on that within the police force?
Can you say that last part again? You seem a little distant from your mic.
I was referring to the qualified immunity. That piece, was that ever discussed or had any conversations around that part on the police department side?
Okay. And we will take those questions back. As Misty stated, in the bigger group, we will get answers and then we will respond to all of the questions and points of clarifications in one bigger document. Are there other questions or thoughts in relationship to the document itself that you want to gain clarity or understanding or raise points about?
No, I think I'm good with everything that was presented, at least on my side. Like I said, I went through it more than once just to make sure I understand it. But I think that thus far I've seen what the document presented. The police department has quite a few things that they're agreed with and want to make changes. So.
Okay, thank you. Pastor Mason?
I have a couple of questions, but you said one, so I'll try one.
Okay.
In the area that talks about adopt a policy of community policing, so that means that that's something that's going to be developed, or is there already something in place?
Okay.
And if there is something in place, are there going to be revisions to that policy that are current?
Okay. Other thoughts or questions?
He spoke to the outstanding rape kits, and I just wanted to be clear to find out if at this point, as we are in July of 2020, that there are no outstanding tests.
Okay.
I kind of heard that, but I want to be sure. In the band chokeholds, knee holds, and strangleholds in the addition, it says additional, is that's being added to the policy? And my question is, on the last line of the additional add-in, it says while they're handcuffed. What happens if they're not handcuffed?
Okay. Anyone else have questions or comments? Okay, so we're going to move to the second question. And that question is there one policy that you found most critical, either as positive or as a concern, that you want to raise to the top of the conversation?
This is Pastor Pam again.
Yes, ma'am.
Be the section on page 8, which says required warning shots before shooting, which talks about the training. Just wanted to find out if that was going to be increased or reviewed, because it talks about 6 months training or biannual training and educational programs as far as once a year. Is there going to be any revision to that or increase in more comprehensive training for officers or law enforcement?
Okay. Any other thoughts?
This is Marquita. I had one quick question. It's not on the list, but I had one quick question about the training. I went to the training as a part of Leadership Wichita. And one of the things that stood out to me that really set on my spirit deeply is the PowerPoint presentation that they gave, which when it came to racial inequity, they were sending the message that everything you see in the media is not the truth. And the pictures that they chose to use was of the 12-year-old little girl in Texas with the police on her back. And then one of the trainers mentioned that if Mike Brown would have got out of the street, he would still be alive today. To me, that was inflammatory. It was disrespectful. We almost had to stop ourselves. Me and I'll let the other leaders speak for themselves, but from walking out of that training. And the duality, what I discovered in the training that we got verbally versus on the ride around with the police officer I had, which she was outstanding. I can see how the training verbally sends the wrong message. And when a police officer gets in trouble for what they're trained to do, they're getting thrown underneath the bus. I think that training is problematic. I think that it was racially insensitive. It was very, very insensitive. And I've already talked to the chief about it, Chief Ramsey, but I think that's something that we need to explore. And maybe if he's already gone back and talked to the trainers about it, it's probably already pulled, but it was, especially being a Leadership Wichita class, that was super problematic to me.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other thoughts that you want to share regarding the document, regarding what was alarming or that you were happy to see in the document that we should share back with those that are refining this process as we move forward?
Yes, this is Dr. Willie Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I wanted to look at that community policing aspect. I know that this is something that we have had in place for a little while. What I'm wondering is, are there going to be any revisions or changes to this community policing aspect of things? Are they going to change the way that it is happening or anything else? I mean, because if it's something that we have in place right now, it's not in place where it's super noticeable like that to where other people would understand it and see it. And so what are going to be changes, or are there even going to be changes to how we do community policing, or is it come as far as they want it to go as of now?
Okay. So what I have right now is questions regarding the qualified community. Was it ever discussed in the police department, and what are the next steps? Looking at the adaptive policy of community policing, will it be developed, revised, replaced, enhanced? Getting clarification on, as of July 2020, there are no outstanding rape kits. On the ban the chokehold policy, what happens with the individual if they are not handcuffed, because the policy is only speaking to when they are handcuffed. On page 8, there is the require warning shots. Will the training be increased and a review for more comprehensive training for law enforcement? There is some training concerns and conversation around cultural sensitivity, racial inequities, being racially insensitive when presenting information to the community, and ensuring that that is one that is addressed and it is not translated into how officers respond, and making sure that we're addressing that both from a presentation perspective and making sure all officers are aware of what's appropriate. And then the last question again was around community policing and ensuring that the community policing policy is one, known in the community and is enhanced in a way that everyone is aware what happens with community policing in our community today. Does that sum up the thoughts that have been expressed in our conversation before we move back to our larger group? Am I giving the right representation of your thoughts and concerns?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
All
Yes,
right,
you-
we're heading back into our big session. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, Sarah? Sarah?
Yes.
Hey, I was just letting you know that I'm on Reverend Dr. Kevin Graham. I'm using Megan's computer, so
Okay.
but I'm on just a little late.
That's all right.
Okay.
LaShonda, really quick before everyone spins back, I am not able to record because I'm not a host. So could whomever is the host of the meeting give me recording ability for the next breakout, please?
Can somebody
Okay.
please add me back to the group with Deanna Carruthers? I got kicked out somehow.
And we are all back together in the large group now, and you'll have a chance in just a little bit to go back into those breakout rooms. So we so appreciate everybody's patience as we are doing this virtually. It's not the same as being in person, and we wish we could be there, but hopefully facilitating a group of 40 in one room is hard. Facilitating a group of 40 virtually is just about impossible to get voices heard. So hopefully you felt like you got to share some a little bit more of those breakout sessions. We're gonna do a rapid fire, kind of what we heard in those groups, and just so that people have a flavor. In my group, I'm gonna share that what we talked about for really things of clarification, and then move right into things of concern. So things of clarification, we talked about one topic that may not have been included in this was the suspended use of administrative leave, how administrative leave is addressed when there's a concern. We also thought that there might be an opportunity to provide more examples and just continue to expand. So overall, those were kind of the two highlights that wanted to emphasize, as well as kind of the past behavior of officers, how that's addressed or how that information might be accessible. So those were some of the questions that were had. What they liked, felt that it was a good format, felt that there was, liked the idea that it was trying to get to yes first and then explained how we were there. Really talked about mental health needs and the idea of social workers and integrated teams, and that was really important for de-escalation and trying to take different approaches within law enforcement. And another question was, how effective is de-escalation from the law enforcement perspective, and how is that working? So that was kind of the comments from our group. I'm gonna go to LaShonda. LaShonda, can you share a couple highlights from yours?
Yes, so our group talked about community policing, wanting to get clarity on whether or not community policing existed, will it be enhanced, and how will the greater community understand the rules and how community policing works. The other question or comments were around ensuring or qualifying that as of July 2020, there are no outstanding rape kits. There was conversation on the ban chokeholds, specifically looking at what happens to the individual when they are not in handcuffs, because the policy is addressing when they're in handcuffs, that procedure would not be used. And then making sure that the training that's provided and presented to the community is racially sensitive. There was an experience that was expressed that what was presented during a presentation to the community did not take those things into consideration and was very uncomfortable. That did not translate into their experience with the ride along. However, it is something that is still in the culture that needs to be addressed, and ensure that that is not the presentation to our community about policing.
Great. Deanna, can you share a few highlights from your group? Deanna, you're still on mute if you're sharing.
My apologies. Thank you, Misty. The primary area of feedback was that they felt that the feedback was proactive, was reactive and not proactive. Some of the questions that were raised also included that they were, how do we assess, how does the public assess information? How do we make sure that information that is shared regarding the officers that are stopping people or making arrests, how do we document, or the public knows that there's a history of police misconduct? Specifically, one of the folks mentioned that there was one person that was pulled over by a group of friends, and they thought that, they said they were stopped because the officer thought that they were doing a drive-by. Another thing, they thought that there needed to be more emphasis on police de-escalation training as opposed to learning how to shoot a gun. And last thing, there was another question or follow-up question regarding jurisdiction, specifically what jurisdiction does the city have in determining qualified immunity? And if not, there's no jurisdiction, how are we partnering with other jurisdictions, specifically state and local governments?
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Sarah?
Hi. So we focused a lot on qualified immunity as well. We had some questions about, yes, like the legal statutes and why the city as an entity took the position that it did, but also what does that look like in practice? What does qualified immunity look like on the ground? So that was our question that we wanted some clarification on, some criticalities, either as a positive or as a concern. Just wanted to see a focus on calls related to mental health issues or homelessness. And there was interest in focusing on a non-police response and sending out social workers trained in de-escalation and what that might look like in practice.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Erin.
So our group had a conversation and some questions about how policies and some of the positive and good things that community policing has done, but then as well as some of the negatives and areas to improve, some clarification on those pieces and understanding what's working and what's not in order to grow. There was also a question of how officers that have a history of misconduct are being handled, and what does that look like. And then most of the group had some questions about the Citizens Review Board. You know, is this a group that is meeting? How often are they meeting? What are they discussing when they meet? And being sure that they are asking difficult questions and not just simply, you know, being a rubber stamp. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I want to know, you have just a few minutes here. I don't want to take us too off schedule, but I know, Mr. Shazer, you might have had a question that we didn't get to before. I want to make sure that you had that at least expressed, or if you wanted to ask the city manager directly now, that this would be a time.
Yeah, it was, my question was in regards to no-knock warrants, and really, he said you can only use them in particular times, like if there's a crime being committed. And my thing was like, how would you know if you're going to somebody's house for a warrant? How would you know a crime is being committed? So, and I did get to bring that up, so it should be on Aaron's notes. Okay, thank you.
You betcha.
Yeah, I had a question as well. So how is the Citizens Review Board selected in the first place? Like, what's the appointment process? And what does that look like?
Thank you. Bob, can you give a response to that, please?
Right. I'm the person who makes the final appointments. The mayor, council, and community nominate people. We ask people to submit applications, and we review those applications. It's the same process that the mayor and council use for other boards and commissions in terms of soliciting nominations. We try to get balance. We want to get people that are significantly interested and willing to put the time in, because it is time consuming. They, I think, meet quarterly plus on an as needed basis, excuse me. So they will meet more frequently. They spend a significant amount of time reviewing cases.
I got a question.
Okay. And we're gonna make you our last one here. So go ahead, sir.
On the police review board, are there any people on there who have had a criminal history? Maybe an opposing view might actually be a good thing.
I had to go back and double check, but I believe yes. We had that discussion when we were putting people on the initial board.
Okay.
Very good. So just one housekeeping thing before I turn this over to LaShonda and we move on to talking about priorities for the work of this council. If you could, at the bottom of your screen, it has a chat feature. We're trying to make sure we know who's attending here for the minutes. If you could type your name in the chat room directly, then we don't have to go around and ask everybody to say their name, and that'll save us a little bit of time and process here. If you have trouble with the chat room, I'm just going to ask that the facilitators make sure that you get the names within your group, and that should expedite it just a little bit for us. So thank you all. Hope that worked out well, that people had a chance to talk a little bit more in groups of 5 or 6 instead of groups of 40. So for that, I am handing it over to LaShonda, and LaShonda is going to take care of the next part of the conversation and the agenda. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Misty. So what the agenda calls for is us to shift our conversation a little bit so that we can focus on what is the purpose of this council, as well as looking at what are the priorities that need to be addressed with the work that this council does. So we are going to spend the next 30 minutes. We're going to go back into our smaller groups to have a conversation around 3 questions in particular. Those questions will really be looking at the internal side of the city of Wichita, looking at it from an external perspective as the city of Wichita being a partner, and then really talking about what are the priorities this council wants to address when doing this work, looking at both the short and long-term goals or outcomes we want to achieve with doing the work that this council will be designed to do. So we're going to send everyone back into their smaller work groups for the next 30 minutes. We will facilitate the conversation over these 3 questions. We'll spend about 8 to 10 minutes on each question. We'll come back to the bigger group. We'll do a call out like we've just done to give everyone some idea about what was shared in the smaller groups. Then we will then document all of this information so that you will have a full document that shares the information that has been discussed by all of the groups so that you can collectively look at the purpose of the work that needs to get done over the next few months as well as long term. So with that, we are going to go back into groups. Facilitators, make sure that you are recording your sessions. Ping me if you have any issues, and then we will come back as a bigger group in the next 30 minutes. All right. So we are going to jump in to our discussion. The first question that we are trying to gain your feedback on is, when thinking about the City of Wichita as an organization with many departments and services and programs that they provide, when you look at the internal organization, what are the issues or topic areas for this council to address, and why do you think that is important for this council to address? So looking at the internal structure of the City of Wichita, what do you believe are the internal policies, issues, programs, best practices that this council needs to address from the perspective of diversity, inclusion, and civil rights?
Good morning again. This is Tarek. The one piece that I would like to understand a little bit more on, I was researching, is on the economic side of things. Is there any policies, or is it something directed towards the chamber where everybody has the equal opportunity towards that, from starting a business to the idea of how, because I've learned through a good friend in Kansas City at the Kauffman Foundation that there's quite a few inequalities for minorities when it comes to starting a business or in the field of entrepreneurship, how the funding is handed or given. I didn't know if this was something that would be part of the city, or is it something outside of it that needs to be addressed?
Okay, we can ask that question for sure.
Thanks.
Other thoughts?
I am just a participant at this point, so I'm going to add a thought. I would love, as an organization in our city, an analysis of upward mobility for folks who fall into minority categories, and then perhaps a policy response, looking at ways we can invest in higher education for people who work for us and our own employees on a city level, that would allow upward mobility. I think that there's a correlation between those who can afford college and might be in an economic situation where they can get the qualifications they need for upward mobility, and those who can't, and what can we do as an organization to better, I guess, diversity, not just throughout the organization, but also upward with management and with other higher positions.
Okay. Other thoughts? So in thinking about this, some of the things that we would be thinking about are hiring practices, are examples. What Mayor Whipple just shared is the upward mobility of within the organizational structure. Are there other things that you believe this council should be looking at from an internal perspective of the City of Wichita as we continue to have this dialogue?
This is Marquita. I would say accessibility. As you guys know, one of the things I focus on is young people, and making sure, one of the questions that I ask young people every summer when we do the camp, which I have a camp that teaches entrepreneurship, is Wichita a place that you feel like you can be successful in, that you want to stay in and build in? And when I ask that question every summer at the beginning of the camp, the majority of the room says no. They don't feel like Wichita is a space for them. They don't feel like they can see themselves being successful here. And they feel like they would do better in other cities. And so that's the problem or the issue. And we spend the rest of the summer addressing that issue to show young people that they can be successful here. I'd like for that to be the truth and not a myth. I like for them to be aware of what opportunities are available to them. I like for them to have accessibility to mentorship. And one of the things that I'm really working with is with the other youth group I work with, Progeny, is getting young people on some of these committees. we need to start getting young people integrated into the civic and civic engagement parts of Wichita, and to job opportunities and internship opportunities that are available, and not make it exclusive to people who are in the know. All young people need to know what's out there and available to them.
And Marquita, why do you believe why are they sharing with you why they don't feel like they have a place? What's the why behind
the why behind it, and this is for all kids, but specifically youth of color, is because they're not seeing a lot of people that look like them that have upward mobility. There's barriers, and Wichita tends to be a city that's siloed. So people pretty much stick to the sides of towns that they grew up in. And when you don't step outside of that, where you're from, you don't know all that Wichita has to offer. And so we need to get in a space of breaking those bubbles and exposing young people to all that Wichita has to offer, and all the types of jobs that you can come into. And especially when we talk about bringing new jobs to the city, and we open up another dollar store in their community, we're not teaching that you can be prosperous, that you can achieve in this city, when the only job opportunities we're given is dollar stores. So we have a lot of work to do that way.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Other thoughts?
This is Pastor Pam.
Yes, ma'am.
I often see us approaching things from those who have a lot, and not looking at it from the standpoint of those that don't have the access to certain things. So I think it's making that available, not just on paper, but also making it available where there's some checks and balances, and they're more than just reports or dialogue, but that it's something that the community can actually see and feel and be a part of. I see also a lot of separation, and even though we appear to be organized, we're often very disorganized.
Any final thoughts before we move to the second question? So I'll give a quick recap to make sure that I've captured your thoughts on this first question. The initial thought was around the economics. Are there any policies on equal opportunity on starting a business or entrepreneurship? And how is the funding handled to support that work? Is that a city function, or is that function held in a different entity? Creating upward mobility opportunities for minorities, looking at tuition reimbursement opportunities, looking at opportunities to promote them through the management and leadership tracks. Accessibility, making sure that Wichita is accessible to all, especially looking at our young people and ensuring that they have access to mentorship, looking at integrating them into civic engagement at an early start, and making sure that they have exposure to all that is available to us in the city of Wichita, working to breaking the silos of our community, as well as making sure that we are approaching things not only from the perspective of those who have a lot, but for all that are a part of our community, and making sure that there are checks and balances in place so that everyone has an opportunity to have the quality of life and success that is available to us in our community, and not just having dialogue, but actually taking action on those things that we have the dialogue around, and making that apparent in our community. Are there other thoughts, or is there anything that I have recorded as this conversation that needs to be clarified and or corrected that does not represent your voice? Great. So let's move on to the second question, and this is looking at the external approach. When thinking about the city of Wichita as a community partner, working with other organizations to improve diversity, inclusion, and civil rights, what are the priority issues or topic areas for this council to address, and why is it important? So looking at the external approach for the City of Wichita being a community partner, working with other organizations to improve diversity, inclusion, and civil rights? What are the priority issues or topic areas for this council to address, and why?
LaShonda, can you say that one more time?
Yes, ma'am. So when thinking about the City of Wichita as a community partner, working with other organizations to improve diversity, inclusion, and civil rights, what are the priority issues or topic areas for this council to address, and why? So an example would be working with our partners. So the city works with other partners to attain talent and understand what they might be able to do to help retain a more diverse workforce. Are there other opportunities? So as Marquita stated earlier, making sure youth are exposed to opportunities. What are other things this council should be raising up as priorities for this council to work on to ensure that diversity and inclusion really exists and that we are not violating civil rights?
This is Dr. Scott. I would definitely say addressing diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I think that is a very influential place where diversity and inclusion is needed, because it's the place where everybody makes money at to determine whether they're going to be in poverty or have a little piece of change. And so we definitely need to stay on top of making sure the workplaces, all the way from down below up to governmental, actually have diversity and inclusion and actually have training in those areas as well.
Okay. And is there anything specific that makes that critical to this work that you want to share regarding us ensuring that training is available in workplace settings?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it really deals with the time and also deals with statistic racism as well.
Okay.
And I'm just going to give feedback from an earlier statement that was made about training and kind of dovetail off the previous speakers, as well as maybe there could be our role as a city to promote training that or programs that have shown to be successful. I think that if we encourage, let's say, the private sector or our partners to be more inclusive, and they might go about it thinking that they are, but maybe they're, even with the best intent, they don't have the proper program in place or proper training to meet these goals. Is there a role that we can play as a city to promote successful integration of these values and successful programs, so that folks who might mean well or think that they're implementing this, they could be more successful in doing so?
Great, thank you.
Also, this is Marquita. Also, I'm a big fan of language and in communication, and how you communicate to business owners and to people that are also coming to look for the opportunities. I want to get out of the mindset that creating inclusive and diverse environments are doing a favor to people of color, because that's the message that is translated whenever you think about diversity and inclusion. And when it's factual that when you have a more diverse workspace, that it adds credibility to the work, that it retains talent to the work, that you're empowering your business by having a diverse group of thinkers and talented people in your pool. So I think that in that training that we do, language is very, very important, so that we can get out of the mindset that diversity and inclusion is some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That it's some kind of incentive for people of color, instead of it being an incentive for the people that are business owners. You do better when you have a more inclusive and diverse team.
Okay, thank you.
This is Pastor Pam. I guess I'm kind of just one that likes basics at the beginning. There are a lot of things I could say at this time, but because we as a council don't have a defined definition or scope of who we are, I think that we are still just kind of going in a circle because we have not yet determined as a group what diversity, inclusion, what those terms mean and come together on a full understanding. We've seen a lot of things written down, but I think we're not there. And I think we need to go to that basic and get that cleared up first, because that's what people in the community are asking. What does that mean? Okay. And it can't be just a coined statement because they want something that's viable.
Okay, thank you. So what I have recorded for this question, want to make sure that I am recording your voices accurately. So it is addressing diversity and inclusion in the workplace, making sure workplaces have training, access to training. This is important because it can also help dismantle some of the systemic racism policies and practices that we see in our communities and in organizational structures. Promote programs or trainings that are successful. So the city taking a role in ensuring that they are promoting those things that are working well, those things that truly exemplify what it means to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. Promoting inclusiveness and the integration of the values of diversity and inclusion into our community as well into the workplace. Language is important, and ensuring that as we are coming up with the work, as we are communicating the work, that we are conscious of the language choices that we make, as well as making sure that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that we are that we are respectful to this thought that this is empowering to the organization, and this is not just a benefit to communities of color, but it is a benefit to all within this community because it has an impact on many different layers, and it allows us to do greater work when we have diverse teams, when we have diverse voices and approaches to those things that we do. And that we need to, as a council, get a clear understanding of the purpose, of the language, of the definitions of what we are trying to accomplish when we use the terms diversity, inclusion, and civil rights for that matter, that this council will focus on so that we can have clear communication back out to the community about the work that's being done, and that this council also has clear communication and understanding about the work that they're being tasked to do. Is that a fair summation of our conversation around question 2? Or are there any things of clarity that we need to make sure it's recorded in our notes?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too.
All right, so we will dive into our last question, number 3. When you think about the needs for this council, what do you believe is needed for this council to be successful in the short term and long term to achieve its goals? So if we think about the next 90 days, this first appointment, what do you believe is important for us to get accomplished in that first 90-day window? And then going further, once we get beyond that first 90 days, as we continue this work, what will be important for this council to achieve? What would success look like for you?
Marquita, for me, it's tapping off of what Pastor Mason said, having a clear defined set of goals for the group. Also, since this is going to be a rotating council every 90 days or so, that we set a firm foundation for the next group when we pass the baton. So it's important to me that the next group is not coming into mess and does not have a clearly defined view of the work that's ahead of them.
Okay. And you would, Marquita, am I clear that those are 2 short-term goals that you would like to see accomplished?
Yes.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Tariq Azmi here. Just segue from that second question into this one. Again, just an idea. How about a group, a volunteer group that can provide diversity trainings by partnering with the Chamber of Commerce? If any company needs a training, a group might be available. I'm not sure how the companies reach out at this time to even have those trainings. Maybe if there's a committee or a group of volunteers who are willing to provide those trainings, that might be a good addition, that we continue to promote the diversity and have that trainings at the different businesses that need it, or even have every quarter the chamber could provide that and the companies could participate, or the companies' representatives could participate. Something, a thought on that is what I was
Great, thank you. Other thoughts?
I will say to his question or statement that I know I'm a part of a group with the chamber that is doing D&I. I don't know where it's going to lead. I just had my first meeting earlier this week, but that is happening over at the chamber too.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yes, kind of Marquita, I just wanted to say the speaker that presented on diversity and inclusion was excellent, who is probably someone that we could hear from who is a native of Wichita. But the other thing is, in the next 30 days, I think there's something we maybe need to go back to, because as I hear people talking in the community, they're talking about the fact that we weren't vetted and that there was no process. And I don't know how you work that out, Mayor Whipple, but I think it's something we need to work out quickly, because we don't want that to distort the mission of this council. And whether that's a resume, whatever it is, whatever that looks like, but I think there should be some type of policy, not policy, or procedure or something.
Pastor Mason, can I just dig a little bit on that thought? Are you thinking that that needs to happen in the next 30 days, or is that something that can be built in this foundational work that this group is doing so that it is present for the next round of appointments?
I believe it needs to be done now.
Thank you.
Start out with that rocky, even though you do it again, then does that devalue the work that we're going to do, right? And one thing that's important is integrity. So I think that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Or what are some of the long-term goals you would like to see come out of this work?
I would definitely, this is Dr. Scott, I would definitely love to see some policy changes and some legislation changes as well. I kind of agree with the mayor in the first meeting that we had. You know, if we can get one piece of legislation changed out of this group, that's going to say a lot concerning this type of group that has been formed. And so that's my long-term goals. I really want to see policy and legislation get changed in a couple of areas.
Are there any areas in specific that you think this group should be focused in on?
Yeah, not just with diversity and inclusion, but also our prison system, the way it's operated. I believe we need to get some changes made in that, and then also education.
Okay. Any other thoughts on long-term solutions or strategies this group should be looking into? So on the short-term side, what you have shared is making sure that there's clear definition, clear defined set of goals, that the foundation of this council is developed so that as the baton is passed, that the new group coming in can get to work and are not building structure and not building governance. A group that can provide diversity training in partnership with the chamber, getting more from Karen Carter when she was here, and how do we capitalize on the information she shared in relationship to diversity and inclusion. And really going back to the beginning of this process and thinking about the vetting process and how do we make sure the integrity of the work remains so that as things are rolled out, the integrity is not questioned, and what can we put in place to ensure the community that those that are on this council currently have been vetted, that the process is in place as we move forward, and addressing any questions of concerns one may have within the community. And long-term, what we've shared so far is really looking at policy and legislative changes in relationship to the education system, prison reform, as well as diversity and inclusion. Are there any other thoughts? Are there any points that I need to clarify that I have not recorded correctly, or any additional thoughts that you want to share that you have not shared to this point regarding any of the questions that have been posed, or things that are on your mind that you would like to share to ensure we're thinking about as we continue with the work?
Did we say anything about investing in diversity strategies?
Now we have.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would like to add that to long term. Just making sure that we're doing the due diligence to invest in diversity strategies.
And Marquita, when you talk about investing, are you talking, how would an investment in diversity strategies look to you? What would be something you would see?
Talent development, performance management, making sure we're retaining our top talent and our future leaders of organizations, and our future leaders of the city, and ensuring that we are creating a high performance culture within the city of Wichita. So those kind of investments in diversity strategy.
Okay.
I would also say long-term and making sure that there's some type of assessment process, that we make sure that we follow up on what we're talking about, and that it not be just something we're doing right now, and 6 months or a year from now, it kind of dissipates and there is no passion and there is no change. So I think we need to make sure that that's kind of in place.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
It's my last thought, but one of these things that I've been stressing is moving beyond the moment. Sometimes in Wichita, we have a tendency to get all hyped up in the moment. And just like Pastor Mason said, we have to make sure that this is just not a moment that we're caught up in. And then 5 years down later, we're having the same conversation over again. So keeping the fire underneath this moment.
To say that another way, making sure this is not just a moment, but that it is a movement, and it is a movement toward change in our city, in our community, and the lives of the people that live and reside in Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
And I'll add real quick, if I can, perhaps finding a structure in place where there is shared, we're losing this, shared accountability in case the next mayor that comes in, let's say this council remains, doesn't fully embrace these values. Is there other stuff we can put in place to have shared accountability so that this goes beyond just an advisory council?
All right, I got you recorded, Mayor. We are transitioning back into the bigger group. I will see you guys there in a moment.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we have a few more stragglers that are coming back into the session. All right, so we've had a great conversation in our work teams around the internal, external, and short and long-term goals for the work of this council. I'm going to ask each of the facilitators to give a quick overview of what happened in their work groups. I will start us first. In looking at our work, we looked at, for question 2 on the internal side, looking at internally, how do we ensure that there is promotional opportunities available through the leadership levels within the organization, that there's upward mobility, looking for opportunities for tuition reimbursement to help and invest in the employees to ensure that they have the education and training necessary to continue in their careers. In question number 2, it was really about promoting programs and trainings, both internally and externally, around diversity and inclusion, and ensuring that that was a part of the culture, and thinking about language and how we communicate, and to ensure that we are not looking at diversity and inclusion as a benefit to communities of color, but it is an opportunity for all that are impacted by having diverse workforces, diverse opportunities within the organizational structures. Looking at question number 3 around the short-term goals, there's conversation around ensuring that we as a council establish a foundation so that the next group of individuals that are appointed are not starting from ground zero, but they are moving the work forward, as well as creating a clear set of defined goals that this council is responsible for working on. There is also a conversation about there being concern in the community about this group not being fully vetted, and making sure that we put a pin in that to talk about how do we ensure the integrity of this group is secured, and that work needs to happen now, so that as these decisions roll out, people are not questioning the integrity and or the feedback or direction this council provides. And then making sure that we are investing in diversity and inclusion strategies, and that this is not just a dialogue that is happening right now in the moment, but this is a movement towards change, that this is a movement that will have an impact on the individual, the community, and organizational structures within the city of Wichita. So with that, that was our group. We'll move to the next group. Deanna, if you want to give an update for your group.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. We had a robust discussion regarding question 1. The questions regarding improvement of the transit system that works for everybody. Currently, there's a perception we have a hub and spoke model, and the current system takes a long time, and so it's hard to make a positive impact and improve the economy and create opportunities for those who are underrepresented or marginalized to have opportunities with the current transportation system. A grid system was recommended. Also, we talked about how do we ensure transparency and overall city processes, and how do we ensure economic development opportunities for minority businesses, specifically access to capital. One highlight in terms of that was mentioned that was not a long-term, but more of like an immediate thing that could be considered. There was discussion around the War Veterans Memorial Park. There's a monument to the Confederacy that was mentioned, and it was stated that the monument, the perception is the monument of hate and a reminder of a painful past, and that that there's no place here in the city for those types of monuments. Question 2, there were in terms of diversity, inclusion, and civil rights. There was a robust discussion around increasing and incorporating the number of diversity training and activities, but even more so, how do we move beyond training to accountability measures? What do we do? How do we hold the city accountable? How do we hold our citizens accountable? If we don't have any accountability measures, there's no way to be effective. That was the consensus on that. In terms of question 3, in terms of short and long-term goals, it was suggested that in addition to parrot what you said, a need for clarity of vision and defined goals, board objectives, and then also meeting in addition to the every 2-week forums and discussions for staff members, or council members to get together. There's a question in terms of autonomy and independence of the council, making sure that they have their voices heard in addition to having what the city staff provide. They would like to have a distribution list so that they can contact each other. Again, and also in terms of redefining what this might look like in terms of continuity of the process. I know currently there's a 90-day time frame, but we've had consensus around how do we make that a long-term contribution, looking at strategic planning, how do we create forums and just long-term process for this group.
Okay, thank you. Erin?
Okay, so on the first question, we talked a lot about, for the internal priorities, making sure that the decisions that are being made are helpful and benefiting all citizens. So really policies that are equitable across the board, and being thoughtful and making changes or policies and really observing, who is this going to affect, who is it going to help, and is there anyone being left out?
Okay.
For the second question, I think we probably talked about this one the most, but really when working with those community partners, talking about how important it is to make sure that knowledge and information is being spread to all members of the community, especially in regard to opportunities. So sharing information about funding opportunities with minority business owners or minority business groups, showing information about opportunity for a bid, really including those folks in all of the conversations surrounding business in the community. And then also with the community block grants, making sure that diverse individuals and neighborhoods are aware of the opportunities that are there for funding. And then for the third question, really talked about defining why the group is here, getting those concrete goals similar to the previous two, and then communicating those goals with the community to hold some accountability. So really sharing, what is going to get done, why and how, and sharing that out so that the group is held accountable, and policy makers are held accountable. And then also for the goals piece, really was brought up a few times, but creating changes in legislation to really make that long-term and intergenerational impact. So, folks' children or grandchildren, won't be having to have these same conversations.
Great, thank you. And Drake, if you could give us a quick update so we can transition back to the mayor. You're on mute.
Yeah, got it. We talked a lot about that this isn't just about criminal justice. This is about focusing on that first question, social services throughout the city, and also learning to maybe grow out of a cultural understanding as well, looking at how to create a more saying, and this is something we talked about in our third as well, was saying that this isn't just a diversity, or this is a diversity thing, that we can use it as a strength. We can grow with the city of Wichita because we are such a diverse city, using that to grow and create just a more efficient and effective city and a more understanding one. And then looking to that second question to say, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. These organizations and things like that to help areas are there. And so we just need to promote them, bolster them, help them, put them to the forefront here in Wichita. And then looking for our short-term and long-term, contacting for that third question, schools, businesses, and other areas, and put them in contact with our group, get established lines of communications, and create a vision or share the vision for our organization with them, so that they can start to try and implement in the long term a structured plan to address inclusion and racism, and diversity and things like that, and structured plan ongoing every year. So that's included in all those areas of life that people kind of see that. And so then looking for higher engagement from the city as well, or from this council as well, because there's a lot of individuals that have contacts across the board. And so taking in that individual responsibility and creating those lines and including them within this council and helping this council grow, continue to grow.
Awesome, thank you. So what we will do, we will gather all of the information that were shared in the smaller work groups. We'll create a comprehensive document that summarizes everything, all of the conversations, and get that information out to the group to have. We will also be preparing a short survey for this group to help us get to this foundational place of thinking about purpose and the bigger goals this council will look to address. And then the third thing we will be working on is looking at models in other communities that have implemented these types of structures to see where we might borrow some successful wins to implement in our community and to make them work for the purposes of this council. We will get that research information to you as well as we prepare for the next meeting on July the 16th. And with that, I will turn it over to Mayor Whipple to wrap us up.
I just want to thank everyone for being on the Zoom today. Thank you for adapting to, to this new format. Really huge thank you to PPMC, excuse me, for facilitating and helping us, applying your methodology so that we can have, I think, more concrete goals moving forward and a more strategic approach to the goals of this committee. Thank you everyone for being on. I think it's the 16th will be our next meeting. We can hopefully continue this by write down our thoughts and make sure that when we come to the next meeting, we're ready to roll. Really think this was productive, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting and really the future of this this council. Johnson, do you have anything you want to add? He's the co-chair, so.
Nope, I think you handled it, Mayor.
All right. So thanks a lot, everyone.